皆さん、こんにちは。ジョーです。今日はですね、今、もう世界で最も注目をされているクリプトプロジェクトと言っても過言ではない、モナドのですね、ファウンダーのキヨニさんに来ていただきました。Thank you for Keone today. Such an honor to have you here today. And I would like to ask you about, of course, about you and Monad and what's coming ahead, what you building this, and so on. I think this is going to be the first video for Japanese audience to, what Monad is and what's in your head. So, can we start, if you don't mind, about your intro and background?
Yeah, of course. And first of all, thank you so much for having me, Joe. Really happy to be here. So yeah, my name is Keone. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Monad Labs, building Monad, really performant EVM layer one blockchain. A bit about me and maybe also about the rest of the team. Prior to Monad, I worked in the high frequency trading space for about 10 years as a quant. Most recently at Jump Trading for the last 8 years of my career. Most of that was basically coming up with new trading signals and trading strategies and finding ways to use machine learning and different modeling techniques to make very precise, very short-term predictions in the market and then go use those to go trade. So our trading team was just very active in the traditional finance space, specifically in the futures space, trading very high volumes as a market maker and as a market taker. Really high volumes, high sharp, very low margin, short term trading. So did that for a number of years, and then joined the crypto team at Jump in 2021. Learned a lot there. Worked with a great team of people there, and over the course of about 6 months, just realized that there was a huge need for more performant EVM. So ended up leaving Jump and starting Monad along with two other co-founders at the beginning of 2022.
Thank you. Pretty impressive background. And then when it comes to Monad, what's really Monad? What's the mission? Why you building this?
The mission of Monad is to get really high performance out of consumer grade hardware, what I would call min hardware max performance, and do that by introducing new software and new architecture to enable a really performant decentralized blockchain network.
I see. Thank you. So before going into the detail, Monad raised a monster round, 225 million. How could it be possible, you think? And also, are you pressured or are you excited about, raising this much money?
Yeah, it wasn't, to speak a little bit about the fundraise, we never had like that specific amount of money in mind. Like the goal for our team has always been just to build this really performant system. But certainly these resources give us a lot of resources to grow our team and be the best possible version of what we've envisioned. In terms of pressure, I think that it doesn't really change anything from for our team. Like the mission has always been the same. We do feel like it's really important to just to make some of these fundamental improvements, address some fundamental problems that we see right now in the blockchain scaling space, and get that first version of mainnet out so we can start solving problems for developers that are building applications for the EVM and are struggling with high gas fees and limited throughput. And then we actually have a longer term, just like a lot of goals of architectural improvements we want to introduce as well. But we've pushed a lot of those beyond the mainnet. So the mainnet is just the absolute simplest version of really high performance EVM blockchain with full backward compatibility, full bytecode compatibility, and full Ethereum RPC support.
Thank you. Before going into also take part. What do you think about the culture of Monad? I think each L1 or L2 has some sort of the culture in it. What do you think?
Yeah, Monad's culture is extremely community oriented. I think the Monad community is incredibly strong, incredibly creative, really fun. It's almost just like a group of friends online who have all these shared experiences. And I think, some of that is path dependent because the Monad community started out at the, November 2022. So like right after FTX collapse, and was very, like a dark time during that period, very much the depth of the bear market of 2022, 2023. So it was just a lot of people that really were passionate about crypto and wanted a place to hang out and make friends and maybe commiserate and just explore crypto together. And over the past year and a half, that's just evolved into a really awesome group of creative and funny and just like genuine good people who are trying to help each other to in their crypto journeys. Some specific examples of that we've seen are folks in the community actually making the leap full time to getting jobs in the crypto industry. We've seen a lot of people push themselves and take on more leadership opportunities or push themselves as a content creator. It's just it's been really cool to see the growth of so many individuals in the community trying to advance their skills and challenging themselves to take on more and more in the community. So I think that's in terms of the culture, something that's really important to me personally, and I think to a lot of other members of the Monad community.
Thank you. And also, my next question is, why do we need the Monad, or a new L1? Why not L2 or another non-EVM L1?
I think there's three main reasons. The first one for me is just decentralization. The second reason is performance, and the third reason is cost. So maybe just to talk about each of those. From a decentralization perspective, I think it's really important that there is a decentralized and globally distributed set of nodes that are all responsible for producing blocks together, and that the power to produce a new block is not just held by one or a very small number of entities, but actually is distributed. So that's the first thing, is that the L1 space is decentralized networks with shared responsibility for producing blocks, whereas at least from what we've seen right now in the L2 space, they have centralized sequencers where there's a single party that's just producing all of the blocks. That's the first thing. Second of all, from a performance perspective, with Monad, we really wanted to optimize all layers of the stack, both the consensus side, which is a lot of networking and around the globe communication protocols. We also wanted to optimize the execution component of the EVM. So we've built a custom state database for storing Ethereum Merkle tree data. That's really important because state access is the single biggest bottleneck for execution, as well as implementing parallel execution and other improvements. And yeah, it's just from all layers of the stack, whether it's the execution component or the consensus component, it's really important to optimize all the layers. That way we can get the most performant possible system. With layer twos, there's a lot of division of labor. It's like a divide and conquer approach, where the layer twos only focused on one part of that. And we just think that in order to deliver the most performant system, we need to optimize all of them. And then the third and last one, which I think is a little bit downstream of the performance, is that we wanted to build a system that would be the absolute cheapest for end users. And that comes from having really high performance, because then the bandwidth of the system literally can just execute many more transactions and then charge a much lower rate per transaction. And that's needed because if we want to onboard hundreds of millions of users into the space, then it needs to be really cheap for all of them. And the system needs to scale to that many users.
Thank you. I think regarding Monad tech, in EVM, what's special about Monad is parallel execution. I don't want to get too technical, but can you briefly explain what's special about it?
Absolutely. Parallel execution is important because all modern computers have many processors and can run many more threads in parallel. And we're all familiar with that. Like we're all used to having 100 tabs open in Google Chrome and be running Spotify and Discord and a whole bunch of other things all in the background. But in the Ethereum ecosystem, like almost all Ethereum compatible blockchains are single threaded, which is crazy because it means they're not taking advantage of all of the power of the hardware. So, like I said at the beginning, the entire goal of Monad is to make the EVM much more performant so that we can get the most possible performance out of normal consumer grade hardware. And that definitely means taking advantage of the many cores that are on normal consumer grade machines. Parallel execution is the architecture of running many transactions in parallel optimistically and keeping track of basically doing enough bookkeeping to ensure that the end result after doing this parallel execution still produces the same result as if the transactions had just been run serially. So just to emphasize, in Monad, a block consists of a list of transactions, just like in Ethereum, and the end result is always the result as if you just run those transactions one after the other. But in Monad, the optimistic parallel execution algorithm is just working smarter, not harder. Like it's doing many transactions in parallel and doing enough bookkeeping to ensure that we can produce the same end result as if we just run the transactions serially.
Thank you. And I think in blockchain space, nothing is, perfect. So is there any challenge you guys might face or have to overcome? One thing I kind of thought about it is, if you build something on EVM, the liquidity fluctuation might be one of the things that people might point out, or anything else that you might think of.
The goal of Monad is to advance the entire Ethereum space and introduce new techniques such as MonadDB, which is this custom state database that I mentioned. It's introducing optimistic parallel execution. It's introducing asynchronous execution, which is another thing I could talk about in a second that actually massively raises the time budget for execution and introduces high performance consensus mechanism called Monad BFT that allows hundreds of nodes globally distributed to come to consensus about new blocks with quite high throughput relative to other algorithms like Tendermint that people might be more familiar with. So it's introducing all of these new architectures or new pieces of technology. And the reason we're doing that is ultimately just to make EVM overall much more performant so that then we can support many, many more users. I think in terms of the challenges, like you were saying, there's with any new ecosystem, challenges around getting folks to migrate liquidity, getting users to adopt the new network, getting developers of applications to deploy in this new environment. But we hope that this is a, kind of a one-time pain and, in the new environment, in this new Monad environment, there's just much more throughput. So then it could scale to many more users. And there's not a need for this fragmentation across many, many different layer twos that result in this fragmented liquidity landscape that you were referring to.
Thank you. What you just mentioned about, some other new tech that Monad is deploying. Can you elaborate a little bit more on those?
Sure thing. One of the pieces of technology in Monad that I'm really excited about is something we call asynchronous execution. And maybe just to give a little bit of background. So in any blockchain, there's two major phases of work. There's consensus, which is just nodes around the world following a procedure to come to agreement about a new block, a new payload. And that usually follows different academic consensus algorithms that have been produced by different research groups. Tendermint is an example. Hot Stuff is an example. Monad BFT is an example, being a derivative of Hot Stuff. So that's one portion of the work. This is, again, like the nodes talking to each other, coming to agreement about the official ordering of transactions. And then the other piece of work is actually executing all those transactions. So operating the virtual machine that's going to execute the individual opcodes in a smart contract. And, you know, when it says to do addition, to like pop two values off the stack, add them together, and then push the result back onto the stack. It's things like that. And in most blockchains, this consensus step and this execution step are interleaved. So, for example, you know, blockchains have a rotating leader mechanism usually. So when it's, you know, say that you're running a node and your node, it's your node's turn to be the leader in the system. So your node is going to produce the next block. Then what'll happen is your node will choose an ordering of transactions from the mempool, and then your node will go execute that ordering to get the end result, and then make a block proposal, send that to everyone else in the world. Everyone else will evaluate that by executing that list of transactions, getting the end result, and only then like send votes back to each other and ultimately come to consensus. So in most systems, execution and consensus are very much interleaved with each other. And the result is that the actual budget for execution is very, very small relative to the total block time. So for some context, in Ethereum, there are 12-second blocks, but the rough budget for execution is about 100 milliseconds, which is 1% of the total block time. So what that means is that, you know, you can imagine like a block is like this big, but then the execution time is just this tiny fraction of it. And there's this shrinking effect that's happening because most of the time in that block, you know, most of the time of the block is actually allocated to the consensus component, which is, you know, global communication. It takes a long time for a message to go from New York to Tokyo and back. So anyway, but my point is that in most systems, because of this interleaved architecture, there's a very limited budget for execution. And that means that then we have limited throughput through the overall system, and then costs are higher, and we have all these downstream effects. But what if we were to move the execution component out of the hot path of consensus and run what we call asynchronous execution, this notion that there are going to be two swim lanes, and the first swim lane is just for consensus. And what will happen is first, the nodes will come to agreement, aka consensus, about block number one. And then as soon as that completes, then two things can happen in parallel. The first is that consensus can start going on block number two, and then in parallel, execution can happen over the transactions that were agreed upon in block number one. And so the result is that then the budget for execution is massively raised from, like in that example, from like 1% to effectively 100%, which means that the system can process many more transactions. There are a couple of finer details around how to make that possible, which are probably outside of the scope of this discussion. But in general, the idea is moving execution out of the hot path into this separate swim lane, and thus raising the budget for execution massively. And a cool thing that I'm seeing is that now other researchers and other ecosystems are talking about this asynchronous execution aspect as well. For example, in both Solana and Ethereum, there's an ETH research post that went up like maybe a couple of weeks ago that is talking about this. So it's good to see this idea cross-pollinating because it's going to massively raise the budget for execution.
I see. Thank you. Going back to the community, now Monad hasn't deployed openly like testnet, but still you're able to attract community. Like you said, how did you really like create this movement?
I think the memes are a great example of how the power of community and the power of, instead of ideas being driven by the core team of developers, but instead being driven by a larger group of really passionate people who are very creative and talented. I think all of the memes honestly have just been created by community members, and then also curated by community members, because not every idea is like a good idea. It's a little bit random. It's hard to say ahead of time like what things will ultimately become like the mimetic characters that stick in people's minds, that become part of the lore. but that's part of the beauty of it. I have a Notion document that's just full of really bad mascot ideas that Bill Monday and I were working on initially, because we were like, okay, there definitely has to be a mascot. What are we going to do? And we spent a lot of time thinking about it. And I think the whole time we were kind of mid-curving this situation, because we were thinking like, okay, what's a really fast animal? Like Monad is really fast, so we need something that represents speed. Okay, could it be a jaguar? Could it be a car? Could it be like, and then in reality that's like thinking about it too hard. But really what had to happen was incredibly creative community members just coming up with ideas and posting them, and then other people like responding to that, and that curation process resulting in some of the things that we see today, like the Melandac, the purple hedgehog, or Chog, who's another like sort of variant of him, or Mooch, who's a fly that was introduced by the French community about 2 months ago. He's really unpleasant. Like he's very ugly and hairy, and like very much a misfit, which I think is also like part of the charm. All of that has just been completely organic and just driven by community.
Very impressive. And also another part of community, which is developer. How are you attracting them, or how are you trying to onboard them and work very closely with the team?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's similar in the sense that there are a lot of folks who are very talented and passionate about building decentralized apps, and have built like a prototype or have built a working version, or maybe they're just experimenting. But they, it's like it's challenging to build anything like on your own as well. And I think being part of a broader community of people that have some similarities, have some common interests, but then also like are all working toward their own goals. That's been something that we've seen is really powerful. And then from, for me personally, like I'm trying to just like listen and learn about what different people are working on, and then see if there's any advice that I can offer, or any suggestions from previous experience that I can offer. And I think other members of the team here, sort of behave similarly in terms of wanting to provide support from our previous experience, drawing on our previous experiences to try to help people, because it's a lot of work to go from just an idea to ultimately building a consumer facing app that can cross the chasm to mainstream adoption.
I see. Thank you. And then when you say consumer focus application, is it any specific verticals, or what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I'm excited about honestly any kind of application that you could imagine being climbing the ranks in the iOS App Store, like whether that's a game or a tool for personal finance or payments, trading applications, sports betting. Like there's just I think at the end of the day, it's like envisioning like what what an app that your parents would use, or an app that your siblings would use, like someone who's actually not super crypto native, and they might not even need to know that behind the scenes the application is on crypto rails. Workouts like Strava is a great example of an non-crypto app that people get really passionate about, like being able to record their workouts, their runs, memorializing the result of that, and then just having that as like something that they're proud of, and that they're building up, that maybe motivates them as well to like work out more. I think that's a perfect example of something that could and should be on the blockchain, that where the permanent aspect of the blockchain then helps memorialize some of these experiences people have had. But that's just one example.
Thank you. And then what I want to ask next is, we see some of the collaboration between Monad and other projects, and also somebody's building on Monad, they kind of publicly saying. So now we want to know like what's coming ahead in terms of Monad development or strategy, or things like that.
Well, our team is very hard at work, testing our internal test net, preparing for a broader public test net launch, and then a mainnet launch. There's just a lot of stress testing and integration work that goes into that. Beyond that, I would say, Monad is fully EVM compatible. So any application that was built for Ethereum or other EVM compatible blockchains can just be redeployed without any changes. It's important that like the full EVM compatibility is actually an important thing to note, because if there are any even minor differences, that means that entire thing should be re-audited in the context of whatever that bytecode change is, because any minor difference could introduce a security vulnerability. So it is really important to be fully EVM compatible, which Monad is. But yeah, just to mention that a little bit in terms of the roadmap, like the focus right now is just full EVM compatibility, and it'll continue to be that, backward compatibility. But in the future, we also expect to introduce new precompiles or new opcodes, new behaviors that can ultimately unlock new use cases for developers. And so we're working on some of those in the pipeline as well, like in a kind of like a parallel process within our team.
Thank you. And this is kind of my personal interest. Every person I meet from Monad team, of course, they are professional, but also personally really well balanced, or I would say pretty genuinely good people. How do you build this type of culture, or the group of the team? Any like secret?
Yeah, I think we're very lucky to have amazing members of the team that have built up this culture and reinforce it. I think in terms of our hiring process, we do look for people that value teamwork, that are low ego, that are willing to frankly, like willing to grind, willing to work really hard, and that feel that no task is beneath them, because at the end of the day, it's a startup, and with any startup, there's a lot of work, and we're always trying to be more efficient, but sometimes there's just no shortcut. So I think that it's a combination of just like being aware of that from the early days in our hiring, and taking that into always having that top of mind, and then just the efforts of the team to continually reinforce that and encourage that culture to proliferate within the team. But yeah, I'm really just grateful to members of our team for working really hard and being really easy to work with, and being good people.
Sounds great. Yeah, I ran through all the questions I wanted to ask you, but is there anything you want to touch upon before we leave?
I would just say that yeah, there are no shortcuts. Like building any great application, building any great company, building any great software is a lot of work, and yeah, it's okay for that to be the case. I think whenever one is getting started, like not like having a little bit of naivete and like not knowing how much work something is going to be is actually good, because if you knew, then maybe you wouldn't even get started. But just having the courage to try to like synthesize something out of nothing is worthwhile. And yeah, it's really fun for me personally to be working with a lot of early stage builders, because they're similar to us, like they're on that journey of trying to create something out of nothing, and it's just so energizing. And that's what I love about the space, is that everything is so new. Not everything is perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect, but we're building tools, we're building applications that should scale to the whole world, and that should change how the world works, give people new tools that maybe they don't have access to. Like if you think about people that are in underbanked countries where they don't have access to good financial services. Like we have in this industry the ability to build applications and tools that enable that for them. So we're building new things. It's not easy to do. It takes time and it takes a lot of hard work. And yeah, that's what I love about the industry is that there's so much possibility and there's so many great people that are working hard to make that a reality.
Thank you so much. I expect you to go to like many conferences for the rest of the year and hopefully listen to or learn more about Monad and also the future development. Thank you so much for your time today. I'm really happy to release this video as soon as possible. And hopefully I can see you some other time in person as well.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, same to you. Thank you so much for having me.